Because we believe as a church, and even if we don't believe it as a church, the Bible is clear. The Bible is clear that it is in the business of bringing people together. And it's in the business of crossing boundaries. And in a world, may I say parenthetically and editorially, where people are making a sport of building walls, we're in the business of tearing walls down. I mean, how are you going to talk about building walls to keep people out, either literally or metaphorically? And listen, church, we're not off the hook. We don't have physical walls per se, but we have all these other walls of our institutional behaviors. We're all for the mission until somebody, someone, something has to change.
Now, we've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes, until
to politics. Before this, some people took church and religious services casually. And we ought to cry about that a little bit, that it took something like this for folk to want to come. There ought to be a certain tear about that. Huh? I had a friend of mine that said his Bible study had gone up 500%. He'd been there for a long time. He said, but he was crying. He said, all these years, and it took a little germ. And people to have the threat of dying, not realizing we all dying. We all don't have, on any given day, you're only 6 minutes away from death if you stop breathing. And yet, it took not an evangelist, not the word of God, but a little teeny germ. One of my friends says it looks like a tennis ball with dreadlocks. A little teeny germ. And he said it breaks his heart. He's glad to see the people coming, but it breaks his heart. And it breaks his heart because the 500% increase was the folk who were already calling themselves Christians. One thing, if new folk were coming, there should be a cry because of the way things were even before. But then there should be a cry because of the way things are. The way things are. You know, we talk too much about Trump. And we really, and I don't hate the brother. God knows, I really feel for the brother. I mean, something's wrong. And as a pastor, I don't have, I'm a Christian, I don't have time to hate. I it makes you weep if you really have a sense of humanity to see somebody losing their mind in public, or at least exposing the loss of their mind, telling people to inject Lysol. There ought to be a cry. America, how'd you get here? America? If you really think about it, ain't the most powerful. You claim to be the most powerful. Some of you claim to be the most intelligent. There ought to be a cry because of the way things are. But then beyond the president, we just passed 4 bills in Congress that gives trillions of dollars to corporations and a few billion to research and testing and small businesses and hospitals. Nothing for the majority of the millions of 140 million poor and low wealth people. Nothing even to states and cities like Goldsboro and localities to help them fight this disaster. There ought to be some crying. There ought to be some congresspersons crying. My dear friend AOC out of New York, she said, I can't vote for this bill, and I understand what she was saying. Some people are saying, well, there's something in there, and we'll get to it next. She said, but you said that after the first bill. You said that after the second bill. You said that after the third bill. Here we are, the 4th bill, and the people who are hurting the most, the people where the pandemic is living, the people who, if it lives among them, it's going to threaten everybody else, the poor and the broken, keep getting ignored. Somebody ought be crying. We ought to be crying that a month ago, the people who prepared our food, deliver our packages, drive our buses, clean our offices, run our nursing homes, a month ago, we called them service workers. Didn't even respect them. Sometimes didn't even speak to them. Service workers. Then COVID-19 changed this country's collective vocabulary. We can't call them that anymore. So now we call them essential workers to try to make them feel good, but then we don't provide the essentials that they need. But now we say we can't survive without them, but we also not going to give them a living wage. We can't survive without them, but we're not going to make sure they have health care and paid sick leave. They don't have the luxury of staying home. We put that title essential workers because if they stayed home, my goodness. We say that they represent the soul of America, but when are they going to see the soul of America? We should be crying like this woman and refusing to cry. We should be calling congresspeople crying, calling senators crying. Those in power should be crying. We can't do this. We can't just give people a medal and say they're essential. Even some people equate them, sure, they say they're combat work. When you go to war, Brother Mel, help me if I'm right about this. When you go to war, you get a raise, you get a bump in your rank, you get a bonus, and you get a GI Bill. And you can be a typist. You don't even have to be on the front line. If you're behind enemy, if you're in a war zone. I was crying so bad this week, I couldn't stop, that I just started writing. I said, dear sisters and brothers in the U.S. Congress, I sent this to the leadership, and I call on other pastors and rabbis and imams to do the same thing. I said, America's original inhabitants found themselves victims of genocide, not because the violence against them was unknown or unopposed, but because too many people in power were too comfortable with other people's death. In the middle passage, some say millions of people were thrown over the sides of ships into the Atlantic Ocean long before they made it to America, because too many in power, even some who didn't agree with slavery, knew what was happening, but they were too comfortable with other people's death. During slavery, people were lynched because too many people in power were too comfortable with other people's death. During the Gilded Age, there were no laws to protect child workers and other workers in factories because too many people in power loved their money and they were too comfortable with other people's death. We know now that so much about the Vietnam War was built on lies. Our sons and daughters were sent into the battle on false pretenses, but because too many knew the death what it would cost, and they were too comfortable with other people's death. And this is a spiritual malady and psychosis that is still too much a part of the way of the American life. I was crying, tears were falling on my pages. I was writing, and others are saying they're doing the same thing. Over the past several weeks, I wrote, we have seen $2 trillion, nearly $3 for corporations and businesses. Before this, 700 people were dying a day from poverty. Even before this pandemic, thousands of people were dying simply because of the lack of health care. In many states where the leadership deliberately wouldn't accept the Affordable Care Act, they called themselves Christians, but they wouldn't accept healing and health care because they hated Obama. And if Jesus did anything, he was a healer. None of the bills we've seen pass guarantee health care, even for the workers on the front line. None of these bills prevent people's utilities from being turned off in the midst of a pandemic. No one guarantees living wages or long-term rent forgiveness. And because of this, people will die. The president has abdicated his responsibility, choosing to lie rather than fully implement the Defense Production Act, which could ensure that we have the materials we need to save people's lives. And why is this happening? Because too many people in power, from governor's mansions to the halls of Congress to the White House, even in some pulpits, are still too comfortable with other folks' death. We're making bad choices. The pain we're seeing is not the germ. It's the bad choices. We got the money. We know what we need to do. But we choose to protect wealth rather than to protect those from the bottom. Do you know in Germany their unemployment is about 3%? Because Germany said, we're not going to give money to the corporate leaders. We're going to pay for the workers' salaries. Make sure that they don't lose anything. But we got this psychosis that still affects too much of America. And that is when too many people in power are comfortable with other folks' death. People are dying not because of the nature of this germ, but because of the failure of government. And it is killing what's left of the soul of America. And it could kill us all. And then I had to write while I was crying to the leadership, I pray this plague doesn't have to reach into your homes before you feel what poor and vulnerable people are feeling. The sickness, the chills, the fear, the hurt, the death, the strokes. I pray we see together that everybody has a right to live. You know, it took the feeling of pain in a very personal way for Pharaoh to turn. And I hope and pray that that doesn't have to happen again today. Congress doesn't need to go home. You need.
My office was in the upper room building in Nashville. That's out there where Vanderbilt, Scarrett, out in that neighborhood. And there was a little hamburger joint down the street. And when we were pushing to desegregate the restaurants, we met with the mayor. He didn't do anything. So we started sitting in. And I picked that little restaurant down the street because it was close to me. And I used to go down there whenever I was in town. I go down there every day for lunch. Every day I get the same thing. Nothing. The lady, same little waitress, like she picked on me every day. We don't serve Negroes. I said, I don't eat Negroes. I asked for a hamburger and a coli. She said, well, you can't get it here. I said, all right. And I'd have Ellen fix me a sandwich. I opened the sandwich, unfolded a napkin, get my little thermos jug, put it on the day, sit there till I ate my sandwich, drank my, fold my napkin back up, leave it on the counter, go on out. I was out of town for about 4 or 5 days, called Ellen. She said, listen, what? Said the mayor took y'all's advice. The restaurants have opened up 2 days ago. So I can't wait to get back. I wanted to get to my little hamburger place. And when I went in, I saw that same little waitress, little white lady with red hair. Looked like she saw me. And I thought I heard her say, where you been? She said, I want a hamburger and a coli. She says, how you want it? I said, well done. She came back, put the hamburger down. Then she said something strange to me. She said, Brother Lowry, I didn't know she knew my name. She said, may I pay for your hamburger? What? She said, yeah. I said, yeah, why? She said, let me tell you. Then she choked up. She started crying. I started crying. 2 fools sitting counter crying. All 4, what's the matter with these folks? She said, you don't know how it hurt me to have to tell you I couldn't serve you. She says, I'm a Christian woman. God taught me to love everybody, but I couldn't serve you because I ain't got no husband. I got 3 little children. I had to have my job. Boss told me I couldn't serve, so I couldn't serve. But every night when I went home and you came, I prayed, asked God to forgive me. She said, I thank God. I thank God today I can serve you. You know what she was saying? I'm free at last. Free at last. Ah, thank God Almighty. I'm free at last. Our movement freed white folks, black folks, green folks, all folks.
Video footage of people getting gunned down. I don't have the stomach for that. I have children. I've had my kids. I can't see horror movies. It's a whole lot of creepy, weird, scary stuff that I'm challenged to looking at. So something within me told me I need to look at this video. This is a young man that was jogging. He was by himself. And I just felt some sense of obligation. Good to see you, Danita. Some sense of Pastor Daniels. Y'all welcome. Come on in. Hey, Brian. I felt some sense of obligation to watch that video. And I was horrified to see this young man being gunned down. And the kind of horror that I experienced raised a real sense of complete frustration and finality. I said to myself, this is it. We cannot take anymore. I cannot handle anymore. And some people ask me, what are we going to do about it? We post, we hashtag, we march. What are we going to do about it? And for me, one of the things that because I spend my life as a clergy person, it's not so much what is everybody else going to do about it, but I have to be honest and ask the question, what will the church do about it? And because I live out my life in the context of the United Methodist Church, I have to ask that question, what will the United Methodist Church do about the sense of police brutality, the sense of extraordinary crime on African American people? Hey, Vaughn, good to see y'all. What are we going to do about it as a church, as a religious community? And this is a hard conversation to have. Let me quickly tell you, I was born in 1970. I came after the horrific period of the 60s. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I was born in a very political environment of civil rights, of political action. I grew up in Marion Barry's D.C. I was inundated. Dr. Daniels, now I'm nervous, y'all. Now I'm nervous. Hey, James, y'all come on in. I was inundated with political activity and action in D.C. But I never lived through the era where people couldn't ride on the bus where they wanted to sit. I never lived through the era of sit-ins. I don't know anything about getting beat up on court steps. That's not been our experience post 1970 babies. I wasn't around when I wasn't born when the news of John F. Kennedy getting killed, Robert Kennedy getting killed, Martin Luther King getting killed, Malcolm X. I didn't live through any of that. I have never seen an American woman being beaten down at a march. I've never seen a bus being blown up. That is not my experience. I've only experienced that through oral history and watching documentaries. So we kind of have, in comparison, we've had it easy because of what folks went through in the 60s and in the 70s and definitely in the 80s. We began to enjoy an amazing life as African-American people, as the Cosbys, if you will. And what is heartbreaking is those of us who never went through those experiences. Of course, we've done demonstrations. We went through the Rodney King thing. You know, we've had incidents. But those of us who never went through those kinds of experiences in the 60s, now we are having to live through a reality that we have not known in this way. Hey, Pastor Ginger, we've not known it. And it's tough to actually come to a day where the racial disconnection is becoming part of our experience. And it's heartbreaking. We're now at a place where we have to be honest and recognize that we might not have moved or have progressed as far as we thought we have. We certainly are at a place where we have to reconsider the magnitude of racism as it impacts our conversation, our dialogue, and our collegiality, our work together in the life of the church and in the neighborhood. Now, let me quickly say that the presidency of Donald Trump has not given birth to these things, but has given voice to these things in high magnitude. And what he is saying to people primarily many white people, he's playing on their sense of emotion, and he's saying, hey, you guys, hey, Lori, hey, y'all, come on in. Hey, Kristen. He's saying you guys have been ignored, and you all fell asleep so much that you allowed an African-American president to even get in the White House. What are you all doing? And so now we are seeing an era where it is okay to be racist. We're seeing an era where people are actually harassing people in everyday life, in grocery stores, in shopping malls, in parking lots. We're seeing a revival of white supremacy. Now, let me say that again. We are seeing a revival in white supremacy, and I wish I could say that that revival is outside of the United Methodist Church. It is not. A good chunk of that revival is in our ecclesiastical community. And what is heartbreaking, and I'm not sure that the larger church is able to hear, and this is why I have to say this here. What is heartbreaking is the deafening silence of the denomination and of our practice and of the silence of dialogue, the lack of dialogue. I am a United Methodist because never did I doubt that the United Methodist Church did not have a deep interest in the liberation of black people. I never saw that. I never had proof of that. Now, we've always had challenges, and we've had them for years. Let me tell you that Bishop James Osgood Andrew had a slave that was gifted to his wife, bequeathed to his wife, and it came up on the floor of the General Conference in 1848 that there's a bishop who owns a slave, and there are not supposed to be any bishops that own a slave. And they had a big fight about it, and they split because the southern branch of the church said, we will not tolerate being told what we can and what we cannot do. And therefore, you get the Methodist Episcopal Church South, and you get the Methodist Episcopal Church. That conversation is still going on in different dynamics. And until and unless the denomination takes this conversation seriously, we will continue to see a deterioration of black membership in the United Methodist Church, and that's what breaks my heart. So since 1968, we've almost lost already 1,000 local churches, 1,000 African-American local churches. Currently, the black membership in the United Methodist Church in the United States is less than 5%. Less than 5%. And I worry that the United Methodist Church is losing credibility among African-American people, and in some cases among Latin American people. We're losing credibility with these communities because we no longer show up in a neighborhood. We no longer defend the neighborhood. You know, and when there are places like Flint, Michigan, when there are places like Detroit, when there are places throughout the world and throughout the country especially, where there is clear suffering of African-American children, African-American people, the United Methodist Church must be the first on the scene. If we are not, we are not living up to our heritage as Methodist people. We have to constantly be talking about race on the ground. Benton Harbor, absolutely. Yes, we have to constantly talk about these things on the ground in our conversations. And this is tough. This is tough. It's tough for white clergy because their congregants in many cases will not tolerate a preacher touching an issue around race relations and race connectedness, will not touch issues around equality, and they struggle. They have extraordinary difficulty, which means I worry that the pulpit has been confiscated by the pew in such a way where the preacher has no authority to preach what the gospel demands, at the expense of having people move to a place of hatred that's not checked by clergy. And until all of us can check behavior like this, until all of us can address it, you're going to have Charleston 9. You're going to have those kinds of things happen. And one of the things that I have to ask is, that young man that walked into that church, did he not grow up in a church? I read he did. Dillard grew up in church. Did he ever hear a sermon on love? Did he ever hear a sermon on how we are to love one another? We don't, at what expense are we going to avoid? This is called avoidance. What expense? Yes, Ginger, I'm with you on that. What expense are we going to avoid these conversations? Because people are dying, in my opinion, because we're not having the conversations. And the world is getting out of control because we're not having a conversation. I'm stopped in front of my house by the police, and I was told that I don't look like I belong here. And I am an educated black man, 3 degrees. And I'm told that I don't belong here because on the street, none of that means anything. But what is worse, if none of that means anything in the life of the church. And the church I grew up in the 80s in the United Methodist Church, I've lost it. I have not seen it. I have not seen its power. Now, we didn't always do it right. We had to struggle. Let me give you an example of some of this struggle. The Birmingham letter, what is known as the letter from the Birmingham jail, that letter, and I know all of you know this, but that letter was in response to a letter by 8 white clergy. 8 white clergy, 2 of whom were United Methodist bishops, well respected in the church. I don't think anybody would call Bishop Hardin and Bishop Nolt, I don't think anybody would call them racist. Well respected. But what they were urging people to do, the Negro community, I'll read it to you. We urge our Negro community to withdraw support from these demonstrations and to unite locally in working peacefully for a better Birmingham. When rights are consistently denied, a cause should be pressed in the courts and in negotiations among local leaders and not in the streets. Well, since when should the church not be in the streets? And whether we know it or not, we have given birth to a culture in the church where speaking up and keeping racism in front of the church is seen as troublemaking. It is seen as you being an angry white man or an angry black man or an angry black woman. And in many instances, you will be outcasted. You will be excluded because you speak up for racial integrity within a denomination that has struggled with it for years. And it's almost as though you cause too much trouble. We can't include you. Because the goal of the Methodist Church then, if we're not careful, what it looks like is, let's keep everything quiet and let's keep everything normal, and let's keep the image of peace even if we don't have the reality of peace. Lord help us. Let's at least look like we have it, even when we don't.
Ourselves and of the scripture that we will explore today. And I want to, as the Spirit has pressed upon me, for us to examine or to lift up the poem that Gil Scott Heron, wrote that God placed in my spirit a reimagining of this poem. The poem was entitled, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. The revolution will not be televised. You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and drop out. You will not be able to lose yourself in weed, blunts, brownies, Indo, or hotbox yourself in an old hoopty you bought last week. You will not be able to skip out for beer, Crown Royal, or past the Cavassier to hide from the reality of this moment, because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Google or sponsored by Twitter or underwritten by Instagram. The revolution will not be found on Facebook or voted on by deacons, bishops, preachers, or a board member of the NAACP. The revolution will not be seen on Netflix or reruns on OWN television. The revolution will not be produced by Tyler Perry or Madea or rebroadcast on Hulu. Trump will not be seen dancing with Mitch McConnell or singing Dixie with William Barr. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be nominated for an Academy Award or Grammy. Brad Pitt will not hold the envelope stating the award goes to, nor will you hear Hollywood narration from the voice of Morgan Freeman. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not help you lose weight, get a hookup, or bless you financially. The revolution will not be found in hair care products bought by us, but not owned by us. This revolution will not be found in Brazilian hair, human hair, 32B, extensions, do-rags, or shea butter. There will be no highlights on MSNBC or World Star Hip Hop. Bloggers will not carry nightly recaps, nor will Steve Harvey dispense advice on how to be a revolutionary after Family Feud. The revolution will not be televised. This revolution will take place when the minds of black people are attuned to the spiritual power that flows from our God. This revolution will take place when we become a priority and cease to be our own worst enemies. This revolution will take place when Black Lives Matter, black colleges are funded, black children are protected, black history is learned, black power is respected, and the black church is elevated as a spiritual liberation center for human transformation. This liberation, this revolution will take place when you discover that you are a child of God, a son of thunder, a daughter of destiny, a person of power. The revolution will take place when you know there is a power in you, a destiny for you, and gifts inside of you. Please stop looking for the revolution to be organized by the oppressor, started by your neighbor, ignited by your cousin, formed by your friends, and start looking in the mirror if you want to see the revolution. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised.
The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. stood for equality for all. Many United Methodists valued his vision and his leadership. Bishop James Thomas described King's impact on him and others.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
Martin Luther King's leadership came at the right time in terms of what needed to be done for this nation. I first met him in August of 1955. Even though he was 10 years younger than I had never really met a person who had his ego so much under control and who was so balanced in his approach to life. If we had only 10 minutes, I would ask him, what would we do now when the major targets of segregation are gone? The white and colored water fountains are no more. The back seats of the bus is no more. Racism is in the shadows now, and the targets are hard to find. And I would ask Martin, what would be an approach to that kind of society which on the surface seems to be non-biased, but under the surface there is a great deal of tension and misunderstanding. Martin was about much more than race. He was about poor people. He was about Vietnam. He was about anywhere that people suffered injustices. So I'd ask you, what now would be your approach to Iraq, to the differences between the rich and the poor? I would want to know what he would bring to the present situation. We need these kind of people today more than we ever have before.
It's elementary, it's fundamental, it's formational. Disciples make disciples. Evangelism begins and ends in discipleship. Evangelism is the work of discipleship. Evangelism is the ministry of Christ in the world, and this spiritual work is ongoing and ever at work in the world, transforming people's lives. To be a disciple of Jesus Christ is to know the love and the calling of God and to assume the responsibility to evangelizing, telling others that they are deeply loved and forgiven by God. Evangelistic discipleship is a personal walk, but what comes with it is a social responsibility. The mission of the church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Discipleship, my friends, is a process. It is a spiritual movement happening in our lives. A change of place and a change of posture and a change of position, a strategic shifting. People ought to know that you are a disciple. Evangelism, when we're doing the work of evangelism and when we're fully living into a life of discipleship, as we engage our neighbors and engage our communities and engage our culture, guess what happens, friends? The transformation not only happens for them, but the transformation happens for us because the Jesus in us can see the Jesus in them. And that's when the transformation happens. Evangelistic discipleship. It is a process of transformation. It is an intentional and spiritual journey of seeking to become more like Christ, but also an increasing desire to invite others into a relationship with Christ. But it's also growing in our capacity to love and serve our neighbors. The clarion call
investigated. Brunswick Pastor John Perry is giving praise to how the city's residents have responded.
I would give us an A. Our citizens have come together, both black and white, and all are declaring that justice needs to be rendered in this situation.
Perry is pastor of Mount Sinai Missionary Baptist Church and president of the Brunswick chapter of the NAACP. He says how police initially failed to properly investigate Arbery's case is why there's so much anger almost 3 months after the 25-year-old's death. Perry says race relations could be improved between the city's youth and police if those at the top are held accountable.
We can't entrust them to something that hasn't proven that it can be trusted.
Part of that process, Perry says, is trusting the police. There are talks among pastors about having a community conversation with teenagers and young adults to address racial issues and tensions that have come from Arbery.
It was Ahmaud Arbery who was protecting himself. He was the one being followed. He was the one being pursued. He was the one who was being blocked by their truck. He was the one whose life was at risk. This brother is unarmed, and I want to continue to lift up that fact that over and over again in this country, we have seen the murdering of unarmed black and brown people in our land. And as a consequence, it's amazing how it is that we are placed in the position. Actually, it's amazing how the perpetrators are placed in the position of the victim when we are the ones who have been killed. Y'all, there are so many things that disturbed me about this. But I do want to suggest that I'm glad finally that two men were arrested. Tom Durden, the district attorney of the Atlanta Judicial Circuit, got the case on April the 13th, heard about it rather, and it's going to a grand jury. The first step was the arrest. Bond was denied, and we're going to see what happens with the grand jury. But what gets me is that today is May the 8th. This happened February 23rd, and that is unacceptable. It's been 10 weeks. It took 10 weeks for an arrest to occur. And I believe only after, again, the national and international outcry and all of the attention that was brought to this case did an arrest happen. Now, let me say this. I applaud everyone who uses social media and uses their voice to highlight injustice in our land. I applaud you. I applaud every person that posted, because the truth is this is happening every day in America. This is not the only time this has happened. No, this has happened in so many different instances. And if you are a person of color and you are watching this, you know what it feels like for somebody to say that you look like the person that committed some kind of crime. I've been in that situation. In fact, in Brandon, Mississippi, when I was 16 years of age, I was pursued by two police officers on my road going down to my house after football practice, and they pulled me over twice in a 1 mile stretch going to my house because they said my vehicle fit the description of one that was used in, I don't know, robbery or something. But the truth is I was being profiled because of how I looked and because of what I drove and where I lived. And the truth is Black people have to deal with this every single day. And yes, Miranda, it is a code word. Fits the description is a code word that is used to bring more harm to Black and brown people. And I'm not going to be on here long, and I don't want to ramble, but again, as a pastor, I want to get this out, and I want to really speak to the feeling and emotion that so many people are feeling right now around the world, because the truth is there are two justice systems in America. Whether or not we want to realize it and whether or not we want to call it what it is, there are two justice systems in America. There's one for Black America and white America. And oftentimes justice is not served for Black and brown people. If you are affluent, wealthy, and white in America, you are more likely to receive justice because of how our system is set up. And so, it's a trip to me, y'all, when I've read some of the comments on social media and even some of my, some folks that I'm reading, and I'm just like, hold on. They're saying, well, we don't really know all the facts, and we can't jump to conclusions. What do you mean you can't jump to a conclusion? What do you mean you don't know the facts? There's a video. That's all you need to see. But I mean, of course, we let the justice system run its course. However, when you have been privileged within the system of justice, it's easy for you to make those types of comments. When you have been constantly a victim of the system, then you are very sensitive when you hear comments like that. And I want to say, and I want to be very clear, that white privilege and supremacy is a weapon of mass destruction that has claimed thousands of Black and brown lives in this country. And just because we are in 2020, and especially in the midst of a pandemic, we are still seeing the same thing happen. White privilege. I could not help but compare, especially because of the date in which this happened, February 23rd. I could not help but to compare this because it felt so much like, and I had the very same emotion when Trayvon Martin was killed. Even the similarities of how Trayvon Martin was hunted down and followed and pursued because he looked like a criminal. And the privilege of George Zimmerman being able to pursue Trayvon Martin and then being acquitted of killing that young boy. That happened on the night of February the 26th, 2012 in Sanford, Florida. 17 years old, killed with some snacks in his hand, trying to go back home on a rainy night. This happened in broad daylight, but it happened on February 23rd. It was privilege that allowed George Zimmerman to hunt down Trayvon Martin. It was the same privilege and supremacy that gave the McMichaels permission to get into their truck and pursue this young man like prey. And here is the thing that trips me out and the thing that I'm so concerned about. The justice system got Trayvon Martin's case wrong. There was not justice for Trayvon Martin. My prayer is that we get this one right. My prayer is that as this works itself out in the court of law and in the court of public opinion, that people of goodwill, that those who sit in positions of power and privilege would do the right thing, would be the voice. I've had several of my white friends call me and text me today and say, Kevin, you know this, I'm devastated by this. What can we do? I know that I have privilege and I know I need to use it for the better. Here's what you can do. It's not just reacting to an event, but it's making the work of justice and the pursuit of it and an every moment of life thing. It is when you are in meetings and when you are in private conversations with your family members and people in your circles, that when the issue of race comes up and you know something is said and something is being done, that you challenge the power structure in that moment, that you don't wait for the death of an unarmed black man or woman to start speaking out and start feeling something. No, it's when you don't see it happening and when it's not getting public press and international publicity that you stand for what's right, and you do it every day. That when you see injustice all around you, which you see every day, you say something and you do something. You say something and you do something.
markers become just a bit more serious, especially in the world in which we live today. I'm a Republican. I'm a Democrat or an independent. I'm a conservative or a progressive. I am upper middle class. With these distinctions, we begin to draw lines, making it clear that not only am I this, but more importantly, I want you to know I'm not that. Even within the Christian community itself, we are not absolved from drawing distinctions and categorizations. I'm born again. Well, I'm, hallelujah, Pentecostal. Well, I'm water washed and oil anointed. Well, I'm evangelical. And I just have to pause right here because you all need to understand who your bishop is. I want it to be understood that the term evangelical is not reserved for some specific group of individuals who hold a particular political position within our society. For if you share the good news of Jesus Christ, if you love to tell the old story of Jesus and his love, then you too are evangelical. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. But every now and then, we stake our claim on what has become life or death delineations. You say you're a Christian, but are you a patriot? Now, the answer to this question in our present predicament is more of an indictment than an identification. Huh? Because they've tried to define what patriot means, and they keep getting it wrong. Within the body of Christ, we too often draw lines of insiders and outsiders, the religious haves and the have-nots, of the heaven-bound or the hell-banished. Who do you say that you are? Now, we need to understand, beloved, this is not the first time within Christendom that lines have been drawn and distinctions made between who is accepted and who is to be rejected. Walk back with me, if you will, through the ages to the year 50 of the Common Era. Paul had concluded his mission trip to Galatia, which is now modern-day Turkey. He had planted a few church starts. Oh, come on now, where are my church planters? And was returning to hang with the homeboys when he received a disturbing word. The churches he planted were being thrust into confusion and dissension by rival missionaries. They were being chastised as counterfeit Christians because they were not circumcised nor following the Jewish laws. They were being cast as second-class citizens within the kingdom because they did not act like, nor look like, nor live like the majority. The ones who thought they were the moral majority. Paul understood this as a theological crisis. He did not respond passively. Hear it, pastors, now. He did not respond passively. Rather, he wrote an urgent letter offering his students a remedial class on Salvation 101. Paul made it abundantly clear that the cross, not the law, form the basis of humanity's relationship with Almighty God. Paul opened his tutorial with the admonition that before faith came, we were guarded under the law, locked up until our faith that was coming could be revealed. In other words, before the cross, we were in protective custody until the one who was to come could liberate us into salvation. Oh, but when faith came, the cuffs fell off, the cell door opened, and all were free to live as followers of Christ. Paul furthered the instruction by reminding those in Galatia that they were all God's children through faith in this Jesus Christ, all who had passed through the waters of baptism and clothed themselves not with the trappings of the state, not with the trappings of the state, but with the righteousness of God. Paul proclaimed there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus our Lord. Paul had to remind the warring factions that they had been rectified, set in right relationship with God, not through the law, but by the blood of the Lamb. Paul had to refresh the memory of those who responded to his altar call that the cross was not a historical event for cerebral celebration. No, the cross was a cataclysmic event that shifted the tectonic plates of earth, broke the stronghold of sin, ended the old world order, and inaugurated in a new reality. The ignoble identities you once so proudly touted have been destroyed, eradicated, annihilated, and now you are bound together only in faith, love, and service. Paul says to those of you who want to cling to the old ways, I know you're proud of your heritage. Oh, listen now. But when you allow race and culture and practice to divide you, you are betraying the truth of the gospel. Paul excoriates cultural imperialism as antithetical to the cross of Christ. And just as Paul preached to the church in Galatia, Paul is preaching to the church in America. I know we're proud of our country. I know we want to delineate between those who are patriots and those that we accuse of not being patriots, those who were born here and those who are not, those who speak English and those who do not. Paul says, I know right now you're fighting over who puts their hand over their heart and who takes a knee during the national anthem. I know you're fighting about it. Paul is calling out through the ages and saying, but remember, your cultural imperialism will not save you. Only the cross of Calvary will bring you new life. No matter how much you love your country, and we need to get real serious right now, because I want the Baltimore-Washington Conference to know I love grace.
We are a new, unsettling force, and we are powerful, a new, unsettling force, and we're here, a new, unsettling force for liberation, and we got nothing to lose but